Hi, today we are going to learn how to simplify square roots. So, what I have in front of me is just a whole bunch of square roots. Sometimes you're able to just type a square root into the calculator and it gives you a nice number. For example, if you type square root of 25 into your calculator, that's going to give you the number 5 because 25 is what we call a perfect square. But unfortunately, not all square roots are so nice. And if we type other square roots into the calculator, we're going to get a decimal of some kind. And often in mathematics, we don't like decimals because they are not accurate or exact answers. So I'm going to show you how to simplify a square root without um, changing it to a decimal. So first I'm going to go ahead and zoom up on, if it's going to let me, on this first example, this first question. Simplify the square root of 96. Now, whenever I simplify, I always like to make a list off to the side of my whiteboard or my paper, wherever I'm solving, of all of the perfect squares from 1 to 100. So a perfect square is 1 times 1. Well, the answer to 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2, 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 4 is 16. Now you can probably tell what I'm doing is I'm taking a number and multiplying it by itself. So next would be 5 times 5, which is 25. And this is a list of perfect squares. Any of these numbers, if I took the square root, it would give me a nice whole number. Let's see, 6 times 6 is 36. 7 times 7 is 49. 8 times 8 is 64. 9 times 9 is 81, and 10 times 10 is 100. Now, there are more perfect squares than this. You could go 11 times 11, 12 times 12. But I find that this is usually enough of a list and I don't need to go past 100. But we'll see. Sometimes maybe we do need to go farther. Now, what we need to do is find out what is the biggest number on this list that I can do 96 divided by that number and get a whole number. So I'm going to grab my calculator and I am going to type in my calculator 96, not the square root of 96. I'm literally just typing 96. I don't know if it shows up on your screen, but there you go. I'm literally typing 96, not including the square root button, so I've only typed in 96. And now I'm going to type divided by 100. The goal is to get a whole number, no decimal. That one gives me a decimal, so that is not what I'm looking for. So now I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to write down every single one, but I'm going to go backwards up this list. So next I do 96 divided by 81. That gave me a decimal, so that is not what we're looking for. 96 divided by 64. That gave me a decimal, even though it's a nice decimal, still a decimal. 96 divided by 49. Nope, that gave me a decimal. 96 divided by 36. That gave me a decimal. 96 divided by 25 gave me a decimal. 96 divided by 16, that gave me a whole number. That equals 6. So now I know that the square root of 96 is equal to, well, 96 actually equals 16 times 6. That's what I just discovered on my calculator. When I did 96 divided by 16, it gave me the answer 6. So I know that 16 times 6 equals 96. That's a lot of sixes. So the square root of 96 is the same thing as the square root of these two numbers multiplied together. Well, there is a rule in square roots that says if something is being multiplied or divided, not added or subtracted, but multiplied or divided, you can split up the square root into the square root of 16 times the square root of 6. Now you'll notice I did not actually put a dot there. It's one of those invisible multiplication signs. Our last step is to simplify the perfect square root. Now, one of these two is perfect. Remember, this list off to the side is a list of perfect squares, which means the number that was on this list is the number that is the perfect square root. So I can take the square root of 16. If you don't know it off the top of your head, you can type it in the calculator. The square root of 16 is 4. The square root of 6 is not a perfect square. So if I typed that in the calculator, it will give me a long decimal. And our goal is not to have any decimals. So I literally just write square root of 6 next to it. And our final answer is 4 root 6. That means 4 times the square root of 6. That's how we simplify our first question. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do a few of these just so that you can get more examples. Okay, let's move on over here. If it'll let me. So, same process. I need to find this number 216 can be divided by what number on this list? I start with the biggest number on the list. I start with 100 because my goal is to find the biggest number on this list that will work. If I started up here at 1, every single number is divisible by 1. So I'd get stuck there and I would never actually simplify my number. Similar is I could end up getting stuck at 4 when actually maybe it's divisible by 16 or it's maybe divisible by something even bigger. So to correctly simplify, we have to find the biggest thing that it's divisible by. So in my calculator, I'm taking just the number 200, not the square root, but just the number 216, and I'm going to type into my calculator. 216 divided by, the first number on my list is 100. 216 divided by 100. That's a decimal, so it's no good. Now I'll pause here and say, some of these you might be able to just tell, depending on how comfortable or familiar you are with numbers, you might be able to tell, well, obviously, Ms. Freeman, dividing by 100 is not going to give you a whole number. That's great, good for you. I'm just going to walk through the whole process, but if you're able to sometimes skip something like dividing by 100 because you know it doesn't work, that's fine. But divided by 100 was a decimal, so that's no good. Let's check 81. 216 divided by 81. That one's a decimal, so no good. Again, as a reminder, I literally typed the number 216 divide 81 equals. All I'm trying to do is find something that does not give me a decimal. Okay, 216 divided by 64, that gives me a decimal. 216 divided by 49 gives me a decimal. 216 divided by 36, that does not give me a decimal, so that is the number I was looking for. So the square root of 216 is equal to the square root of, I'm just going to put the two numbers that I just discovered, 36 times 6. Because when I did it on the calculator, I did 216 divided by 36, and I clicked enter, it gave me the number 6. So that is how I know that 6 is the number that gets put here. Well, now the rule of roots is that because they're being multiplied together, I'm allowed to split them up. Square root of 36 times the square root of 6. Again, it's that invisible multiplication. And then the square root of 36 is a perfect square, so I simplify it to just the number 6 and then root 6, because same as last time, square root of 6 is not a pretty number, so I cannot simplify that any farther. Okay, let's go ahead and do some more. Okay, square root of 98. Now, same process. I'm noticing though that guess what? 98 is smaller than 100, so I don't even need to do 100. Anything bigger than my number is not going to work out. So I'm going to skip 100 and let's go straight to 81. 98 divided by 81. Nope, that's a decimal. 98 divided by 64. Nope, that's a decimal. 98 divided by 49. Oh, that was a whole number. So when I did 98 divided by 49, it gives me the number 2. So I can change this to the square root of 98 equals the square root of my number from this list, 49, times 2. Because when I divided, I got the answer of 2. Next step, split them up. Because they're being multiplied, I'm allowed to do that. Square root of 49 times the square root of 2. Last step, simplify that perfect square root. The square root of 49 is 7. So our final answer is 7 root 2. Okay, we'll just probably do a couple more. Square root of 18. Now, square root of 18, here's a great example of, I'm not going to choose any number bigger than 18. So that means I can skip all of these bottom numbers and go straight to 16. So 18 divided by 16, that's a decimal, no good. 18 divided by 9, now this is an example of something maybe you already know what 18 divided by 9 is, but if you didn't, you can type it in the calculator. 18 divided by 9, that worked, because 18 divided by 9 is 2. So I can change the square root of 18 to the square root of 9 times 2. Again, 2 is what I got on the calculator. And then I split them up, square root of 9, and then times, that invisible multiplication symbol, times the square root of 2. And the square root of 9, I'm going to simplify my perfect square. The square root of 9 is 3. So our final answer is 3 root 2, or 3 times the square root of 2. Now, I will mention before this video ends that there are sometimes going to be cases where you cannot simplify the square root. Maybe I have, the question is simplify the square root of 17. Okay, well, 17 happens to be a prime number, so you can't square root it. Or, sorry, you can't simplify it. That means that the only thing on this list that would work is the number 1. And if the only thing that works is the number 1, let me show you what would happen. We would change it to 1 times 17, because 17 divided by 1 is just 1. Then we would split that up into the square root of 1 times the square root of 17, and then the square root of 1 is just 1 root 17, and 1 times the square root of 17 is just the square root of 17. So you'll notice we did a whole bunch of work to just get the same answer. So if the only thing that works is 1 and nothing else does, then to simplify it, you just rewrite that same expression. Okay, I do want to go show you a couple things at the bottom of this page. They throw in a little extra stuff, which is great. Okay, I erased my list. That's okay. That's the kind of thing you can make on your own. But let's walk through this. For the moment, I'm going to ignore this 10. I am going to have to pay attention to it later, but right now I'm going to ignore it. Square root of 96. I'm going to start my process. Square root of 96 divided by each of the numbers on the list. Now, we actually, earlier in this video, did the square root of 96. We already divided 96 divided by 100, 96 divided by 81, and we went through the whole list and discovered that we can do 96 divided by 16. 16 was our perfect square. And 96 divided by 16 equaled 6. This is that one with a lot of 6's. Then we split that up into the square root of 16 times the square root of 6. And the square root of 16 equals 4. So our answer is 4 root 6. Now, I'm not actually allowed to ignore this 10 though. So really, because the 10 is squished right next to the square root of 96, that means 10 times this right here, 4 root 6. Well, this is all just being multiplied together, right? There's an invisible times right there as well. So I'm allowed to multiply 10 times 40. Oh, sorry, I mean 10 times 4, which equals 40. And that root 6 still just stays there. So if there's a number in front, that is how you simplify it. So that was kind of an introduction and also a long video about how to simplify square roots.